He lived with his wife for 43 years, yet every morning he woke up like a lonely single man in his own home. James, 68, lives in the suburbs of Cincinnati, Ohio. That quaint two-story American house still stands where it always has, its white picket fence still freshly painted by him every spring, but what's inside is no longer intact. Each morning he walks down to the kitchen and makes a cup of black coffee with no sugar, just like he has for decades. But Linda's eyes, his wife's, no longer follow him from the dining table like they used to. There's no good morning, no familiar smile, only the soft clink of porcelain against a metal spoon and the quietest sigh, just enough for anyone who has ever loved deeply to feel a fine crack run through their heart. James didn't cheat. Linda didn't either. They didn't fight, never raised their voices. But love, the kind that once burned like a candle on a freezing Ohio winter night, had faded into a weak flame. They were still together every day, but the emotions had slipped out of the relationship without either of them noticing. He started to feel like a shadow, unseen, untouched. And what scared James the most was how terrifyingly familiar the loneliness had become. He used to be the model husband, the devoted father, worked at a factory for over 30 years, retired with a stable pension, no debt, no vices. But by the time he left the job, the kids had grown up and moved out of state, and the house began to feel empty. Linda started spending more time tending to the garden and reading. James didn't know what he was supposed to do anymore. His weight dropped to 185 pounds, a surprisingly low number for him. He couldn't sleep, waking up at 3 a.m. and unable to drift back. His blood pressure fluctuated. The doctor told him to exercise, to think positive thoughts. But how do you stay positive when every day you feel yourself disappearing from the life of the woman who once loved you more than she loved herself? The only thing James had left was silence. But even silence now had become a burden. He didn't want to bother Linda, so he kept everything inside. And the more he held in, the more distant he felt from her. They sat together in the living room, watching TV, but their souls felt continents apart. This wasn't a marriage. It was two people living inside a long-standing, silent contract. Then on a rainy Sunday afternoon, James received a call from an old friend, a psychologist who used to work with veterans recovering from PTSD, now a specialist in mental wellness for older adults. His name was Dr. Authority. His voice was deep, calm, and filled with empathy. James, you may not realize it, but your heart is still alive, and love hasn't disappeared. It's just waiting to be awakened. For the first time in years, James felt a lump rise in his throat, not from illness, but from a sentence that arrived exactly when he needed it. Linda didn't hate him. He hadn't stopped loving her. They had just forgotten how to touch each other emotionally. And sometimes what's needed isn't some grand gesture, but simply a sincere conversation at the end of the day, a gentle hand squeeze, a quiet, "Are you okay?" that carries warmth deeper than words. That night, James sat by the living room window, watching the rain tap against the eaves. He made a decision. Tomorrow would be different. He wouldn't just live. He would love again the woman he chose nearly half a century ago. And from that decision, a journey of renewal began, not just for James's marriage, but for millions of men quietly living in the shadows of their own silence. The next morning, James woke up earlier than usual. It was still dark outside, but he didn't want to stay in that cold bed any longer. He walked into the kitchen and made 2 cups of coffee, something he hadn't done in a very long time. One cup he placed where Linda used to sit. The other he held in his hands. When Linda came down the stairs, her face wore the usual quiet expression, but she paused when she saw the steaming cup on the table. No one said a word, but her eyes, for just a brief moment, softened. Perhaps some part of her realized too. It had been far too long since either of them had taken the first step. James didn't know if a cup of coffee could change anything, but that's where he started. Each day he chose one small thing to do, a morning greeting, a simple question. Did you sleep well? A blanket folded neatly, a plate of pancakes placed in front of his wife on a Sunday morning. He wasn't expecting a response. He was simply practicing caring. And then James called Doctor Authority again. The second call wasn't just a consultation. It was a turning point. The doctor asked, "What made you fall so deeply in love with Linda in the first place?" James answered after a long pause, "She was the only person who ever truly saw me, from the inside." Dr. Authority nodded. "Then let her see you again. Not the tired James, not the disappointed husband, but the James with his real heart." From then on, he started writing letters to Linda, one each week. Small notes, nothing fancy, nothing long. Just a few lines about something beautiful he noticed that day, and one sentence to say thank you for still being there. At first, Linda said nothing, but James noticed. She kept the letters, folding them carefully into a small wooden box. To him, that was a silent reply, one filled with hope. Then one afternoon, as they sat together on the front porch, somewhere they hadn't shared in a long while, Linda suddenly asked, "Do you remember the first time we danced in the kitchen?" James's heart tightened. He hadn't expected her to remember. "Of course I do. That song is still in my head." And as if time turned backward, James stood up and held out his hand. "Would you like to dance again?" Linda hesitated, then took his hand. The gesture, trembling, slow, but deeply moving. They no longer danced like they did when they were young, but their steps said what words had forgotten over the years. "We still love each other. We just forgot how to show it." That night, for the first time in many years, James and Linda stayed up late talking. They didn't discuss the kids or illnesses. They talked about memories, old dreams, and the little things that once made them laugh. The house, once cold and silent, was now filled with the quiet sound of laughter and the gentle breath of a love being brought back to life. After that night, James knew he couldn't go back to the past, but he could absolutely rebuild the present, step by step, one small thing at a time, like learning how to breathe again after a spiritual stroke. He started with himself. Dr. Authority once said, "A man can't take care of a marriage if he hasn't learned to take care of himself." That sentence struck deep in James's heart. Each morning, instead of sitting on the couch waiting for the day to pass, James laced up his old sneakers and walked around the neighborhood. At first, just 10 minutes a day. After a week, 20 minutes. A month later, he was walking 2 miles a day. No one forced him, but James could feel his chest open up, his legs steadier, his mind clearer. One time, passing the basketball court near the park, he stopped and sat on a wooden bench. For the first time in years, he looked up at the blue sky without feeling a weight in his chest. He also started eating healthy again. No more instant cereal, no more cookies and soda every afternoon. James chose boiled eggs, fresh vegetables, grilled fish. At first, Linda didn't pay much attention, but one day she asked, "How long do you plan to keep this up?" James looked at her and gently replied, "As long as you're still here with me." Linda didn't respond, just turned away. But that night, she served vegetables for both of them at dinner. Alongside caring for his body, James set a schedule of emotions, something he learned from the doctor. Every Monday night, he wrote one line to thank Linda. Every Wednesday, he picked an old song and played it softly in the living room, the kind they used to love. And every weekend, he asked her to join him on the porch, just for 15 minutes, even if they didn't say a word. What he wanted to rebuild wasn't long conversations. It was presence, being there, breathing together, listening to the silence together. James didn't rush. He didn't expect Linda to change overnight, but his patience slowly softened the ice that had long encased the heart of the woman he loved. One morning, Linda brought out 2 cups of tea to the porch and placed one in front of James. "Peppermint tea. I remember you used to like this one." It was the first time in years she had done something like that for him. James said nothing, but his eyes lit up like the sun breaking through after an endlessly long winter. He also took the initiative to schedule regular doctor checkups. "I don't want to become a burden," James said, but in truth he did it because he knew health isn't just for living, it's for loving. To hold Linda's hand without trembling, to take her grocery shopping without needing a cane, to walk beside her on sunlit sidewalks without gasping for breath, so he could whisper, "We may be old, but my love for you is still young." Little by little, Linda changed too. She began sharing more stories during meals, began placing her hand over his while they watched the news. And one day she said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." James smiled. He didn't say anything. He just squeezed her hand a little tighter. There was no miracle overnight. But one thing was certain: love, when nourished with patience and real effort, can come back to life. And James was living proof of that. That day was an autumn day, colder than usual in Ohio. Maple leaves had fallen thick along the walkway in front of the house, and James, as part of his new routine these past few months, went outside early to gather them. He was bending down to scoop the leaves into a plastic bag when a sharp pain shot through his lower back. A sudden spasm, like a reminder that a 68-year-old body could no longer keep pace with the will of the heart. He collapsed onto the front step, hand on his knee, gasping, cold sweat soaking into the collar of his shirt. Linda saw him from the kitchen window. She rushed out immediately, something she hadn't done in years. No scolding, no complaints. She lifted him gently, wrapped her arm around his back, and helped him into the house. For the first time in many years, James felt a real embrace, not a habitual gesture, but genuine worry, real care reflected in every movement. Lying on the sofa, the pillow behind him adjusted by Linda, the blanket tucked neatly across his chest, James suddenly said, "I thought I was okay, but I'm still scared." Linda paused, looking at him. Her gaze softened, and she sat down beside him, holding his hand. "I'm scared too," she said. "Scared that we've been living without really feeling anything. And I thought, maybe you didn't need me anymore." That was the moment when all the silences of the past years were torn wide open. James began to cry. Not out loud, just old, quiet tears rolling slowly down wrinkled cheeks, as if everything he had kept buried inside had finally found a way out. Linda placed her hand on his face, gently wiping away the tears. "I've always needed you," he whispered. "I just didn't know how to say it anymore." Linda didn't respond. She simply sat there beside him, holding his hand tightly. And in that silence, a true connection was reborn. Not through words, not through explanations, but through the simple presence of two people who had weathered so many storms and were now sitting together, just like in the very beginning. That night, James couldn't sleep, not because of the pain, but because his heart was beating too fast. Not in fear, but in something that felt like awakening. He turned to Linda, his wife sleeping beside him, and saw that her hand was still resting gently on top of his blanket. In that moment, he knew every effort, every small thing he had done over the past months had mattered. The next morning, James picked up the phone and called Dr. Authority again. When the doctor answered, James didn't speak right away. He just exhaled softly and smiled. "I think I just came back to life." Dr. Authority stayed silent for a few seconds, then replied slowly, "You didn't just come back to life, James. You saved your heart, and the heart of the woman who's been waiting for you all these years." The call ended, but its echo lingered. James stood up, still hurting, but no longer afraid. Because for the first time in a very long while, he no longer felt alone in his own home. James's story isn't a miracle. It didn't start with a happy ending, and it certainly wasn't an easy journey. It was built from the smallest things: a morning cup of coffee, a walk in the park, a handwritten thank you, a glance that no longer turned away. Love in the later years of life is not loud. It lives in patience, in listening without interrupting, in silence that still feels safe. I'm Dr. Authority. I've walked alongside thousands of older patients across the United States, men and women who once believed their emotions had died, that marriage was an old coat they no longer fit into. But I always tell them, feelings don't die. They simply fall asleep. And you can be the one to wake them back up. If you're watching this video and you feel like James's story mirrors part of your own, then I want you to know this: you are not alone. There are countless men out there, men who've spent a lifetime being strong, carrying a family, who now feel powerless when faced with the silence in their own home. But like James, you can begin again. Start by taking care of yourself. Eat healthy, move your body. Don't let your physical state become a burden to your emotions. Let each step be a step toward connection. Don't accept fatigue as an unavoidable part of aging. See it as a whisper. It's time to live differently, to live more deeply, more lovingly. And then, don't hesitate to express affection to your partner, even after 30, 40, or 50 years together. A compliment, a hand held, a note that says, "You're still the woman I choose," every single day. These small things don't make you weak. They make you stronger than anyone else. Because you dare to love, you dare to change. I know you might be thinking, "I'm too old to start over." But let me tell you this. No one is too old to begin again. Only hearts that refuse to open grow lonely. James didn't become someone else. He simply returned to himself. The man Linda once fell in love with. The husband who listened. The father with a gentle heart. And you too don't need to become someone else. You just need to return to your true heart. If today's story touched you, then maybe this is the moment you need to pause, take a deep breath, and ask yourself, do I still want to love and be loved? If the answer is yes, then do something, right now. Send a message, brew a cup of tea, ask a gentle question, or simply sit side by side. Don't wait for a fall to realize who will catch you. Choose to step toward each other while you still can. And if you feel this video brought value, not just to you, but to fathers, grandfathers, and husbands quietly struggling in silence, hit the like button to let us know you're still here. Share this video like an outstretched hand to someone who needs it. And subscribe to this channel because every week I'll continue to share real stories of real people who stepped out of the shadows and came back to life through love. You're not just a viewer, you are part of this journey. If you're ready, truly ready to do something different for yourself and the person you love, then this video is your beginning. I'm Dr. Authority, and I believe every heart can heal. If you're willing to place your hand over your chest and say, "I will begin again, starting today." There are stages in life, especially after 60, when people often fall into a sense of emptiness. The children grow up and leave, careers come to an end, and the roles that once defined our identity seem to quietly fade with time. But what makes many older men feel the most alone is not material loss. It's the silence inside their own home. James's story is not uncommon. It represents millions of husbands and fathers who dedicated their lives to their families, only to find themselves emotionally disconnected from their partners. They didn't fight, they didn't leave, but the familiarity between them slowly turned into a quiet routine, like two aging friends sitting on an old boat, staring off in opposite directions. From James's journey of transformation, there are three powerful lessons anyone can apply to their own life, especially those entering the later chapters of aging. First, it is never too late to begin again. At nearly 70, James proved that change doesn't require youth. It requires sincerity and patience. A cup of coffee made for someone you love, a hand held at the right moment, or a heartfelt thank you, each has the power to awaken something long dormant in a relationship. Second, taking care of yourself is the foundation for connecting with others. James couldn't heal his marriage if he was physically and emotionally exhausted. Prioritizing health, from nutrition to movement, isn't just about staying alive. It's about having the strength to love. A man who is physically well is more confident in expressing emotions, more willing to open up, more ready to love again the partner who's been by his side through the years. Third, love is action, not memory. Love doesn't live in the past. It lives in what we choose to do each day. When James wrote letters again, played their favorite songs, and sat beside his wife like he did in the early days, he was loving through action. And it was these actions that truly bridged the distance between them. Whether you're 60, 70, or 80, the question isn't how many years you have left, but whether you are truly living each day with the one you love. Emotions don't grow old with age. They just need to be reawakened, nurtured, with courage and a heart willing to take the first step. If you see yourself in James's story, try starting again with a kind question, a compassionate look, or simply the willingness to listen without interrupting. Because the most beautiful thing isn't how long a marriage lasts, but whether it still brings life, warmth, and love to each day. You are never too old to love again, a person, a life, and most of all, yourself.